Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. Today, we're so excited because we're talking about a way to review curriculum, something that everyone seems to be talking about these days.
Absolutely. And we have two amazing guests to talk about it. We have Barbara Davidson, who we just had on in January, and she's the executive director of the Knowledge Matters campaign and president of the nonprofit Standards Work. And returning guest from years ago, Sue Pimentel, who is co founder of Standards Work, and a million other things that we could say about Sue. But they will both talk to us today about the Knowledge Matters review tool. So, welcome, Barbara and Sue.
Thanks.
Great to be with you guys.
Yeah. Well, we're really excited to dig into this tool. We know that it's a new tool on the scene, on the literacy scene. So we're wondering, how did the review tool come to be, and what need was there for this in the market space?
Yeah, I'll take that one for starters. It really was the result of sort of demand in the field, I would say. As many of your listeners will probably know, we stood up an enhancement to the Knowledge Matters website a year ago, and in doing so, featured 6, now 8 curricula that we think do a particularly fine job of building background knowledge, these ELA curricula, obviously. And a lot of people asked us, well, how did you make that decision? I mean, how did you arrive at those that you did? And we thought that the website did a pretty fine job of describing that. We weren't so much interested in picking winners and losers. We were far more interested in showing people what good looks like, what it looks like, and that it is possible, to both build content knowledge and address literacy skills. And to do so with that there are a variety of ways in which publishers might go about doing that. These 8 curricula, now 8, that we recognize on the site and lift up and celebrate and ask people to sort of study as good exemplars, are very different. And so that was, our purpose at that time. And yet people still, asked, well, what went into it, and what criteria did you use, and who did that work, and so forth. So this is our way of being more sort of explicit about what we believe goes into great content, great ELA curriculum that builds content knowledge along the way, and that is really puts content knowledge sort of at the center of the enterprise. So there was a lot of demand, I would say. And then the second reason that we decided it was important to do is that as the science of reading has become more and more understood and embraced and understood to include the science about the importance of building background knowledge, I think that has presented an opportunity to really get clearer, and there's more demand to really understand the connection between content knowledge and reading comprehension. So we felt that the field was sort of, interested in going deeper, and that's what we feel like, or what our hope for the tool was.
Can I add to a couple of sentences to that?
Of course.
So, part of it is that when you think about knowledge building and when teachers think about knowledge building, almost anything we read builds our knowledge. But the problem is that it's more haphazard, and a curricula isn't necessarily built to build knowledge. And so it becomes, gosh, I don't know, I guess it kind of builds knowledge. And a lot of curricula say they build knowledge, and they don't do it sustainably. And so we wanted to be able to show a difference. The second thing is that we know there are lots of review tools out there. We know ed reports, goodness sakes, they've, been important in the field in terms of, telling us what's HQIM, but it's based on alignment to standards. Now, that's a really important part of the equation, but it's not the full part of the equation. And so that's what this tool is meant to do, is to be an add to. And Barbara, you might want to just talk a little bit about, because it was Barbara's thought of, well, we aren't trying to create something totally new that people have to say, oh gosh, now we just got to do it all over again, but something they could add when they're reviewing curricula.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know if you all want to ask something specifically about that, but yeah, we consider this tool in addition to a way of really digging into the reading comprehension, the knowledge building piece. And that is why we explicitly left out the foundational skills
We had a debate about
criterion,
that.
if you were. Yeah.
Initially. But Barbara convinced me I really got it, and she was right. Go keep
Yeah.
going, Barbara, about that if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want to suggest, I sort of worried that if we included that, which is not to say that those foundational skills aren't vitally important. We're real clear about that. Our website makes that clear. It all begins there. And yet there are other good tools out there that do a pretty fine job of laying those expectations out there. There aren't tools that do as the important job that we feel that this one does of laying out and really driving people's understanding and sort of contributing to the field's understanding of what knowledge building is and the important science that there is about that as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's, I'd love to go back to something that Sue said, and that before we dive into the tool. Sue, you mentioned this idea of random acts of knowledge, right? That anytime we're reading something, we are building our knowledge, but there's a difference between a coherent knowledge build and kind of like a randomized knowledge build. So I'm wondering if you can kind of elaborate on that, right? Like, what's the difference between these random acts of knowledge and a knowledge building curriculum? Because on the Knowledge Matters campaign site, we do have 8 uplifted as knowledge building curriculum. And I'm just thinking, if I were a teacher listening right now, I'd be like, well, what is the difference between maybe what I have, not one of those 8, and those 8 that are listed as knowledge building curricula?
So do you want me to start, Barbara, and then you can dig in
Please.
from there? So part of it is a sustained attention to a topic. So you're reading several texts on a topic. You're building your knowledge about the world, right? It's not based on a reading strategy or the standard of the day or whatever. It is built on, we're going to take 2 to 3 weeks, could do more, where we're really going to deepen our knowledge on a particular topic. And that means that we're reading about it, we're writing about it, we're talking to each other about it, we're reading a volume of reading. So we're doing all those things that are interconnected to build our knowledge. And that's very different. And I'd also draw a difference between topics and themes. We've come down heavily on topics because sometimes, you can look at a theme. And first of all, I'm not sure kids get themes, but be that as it may. But then you look at them, and then they're sort of big and loopy, and they stuff a lot of stuff in. So one week you're reading about photosynthesis, and the next week you're reading about railroads, or you're reading about coming of age or something like that. It's amazing what they can stick under a theme. So those are curricula that mainly look at sort of a reading strategy or a standards that they're trying to get. And so this text, you can use this standard, with this text, you can use that. It's totally different when you're dealing with a curricula that's been designed for building knowledge. Barbara, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, I think that's great. I mean, it's really all about this oral language development and the need to build these mental schemas so that students can attach as they're learning something new. It attaches to something, and that's that Velcro, that stickiness that Marilyn Adams and so many others have talked about, and that's how, I mean, students learn when they know something about a topic, and they can recognize familiar vocabulary and so forth. So we want to create that stickiness, and that doesn't happen when you're switching from one topic to the next, when you're reading articles on all kinds of whether these articles are put together primarily to provide an opportunity to to focus on a comprehension strategy, or if they're just, we're sort of thrown together for whatever other reason. We want to give students that sort of assist, that opportunity to become experts and to begin to make those create those schemas in their brains. And so that's really why these all of these curricula, doing it in different ways, obviously, but lean on that, the importance of creating that familiarity and building knowledge. Not just, it's certainly not, and you all have talked about this well in the past, it's not accessing knowledge, it's building content knowledge in the disciplines, and with rich vocabulary that is both academic and domain specific, and creates those schemas in the brain.
And I don't want to leave out the joy of learning. I mean, when's the last time I heard from my grandkids a strategy they learned? It's reading strategy they learned at school, or the standard they're working. No, I hear about what they're reading about, what they're learning about. So it's partly that as well. And when you watch kids go deep into a topic, Barbara has done that through her Knowledge Matters story. It's amazing what you hear students are able to share and do. And they love being an expert. They love that.
And I think, you all asked, so why we did this, and I kind of jumped over this. It became increasingly important for us, and I think Sue's going to talk just a moment here about what these what is sort of packed into these 8 domains. But it became increasingly important for us to let folks know that there are curricula out there that are sort of wrapping themselves in the knowledge flag, and really aren't doing that in this sustained way that sort of builds those schemas that build on knowledge, and do so over a sustained period of time in the way that these curricula do. So that was a concern that we have, that as the importance of background knowledge is better understood and better valued, and that review committees and others are, and state agencies and so forth are saying it's important that you have, not unlike back in the day with the Common Core folks, slapping Common Core, onto a book and saying that it is. We didn't, we wanted to begin to distinguish those that at least we feel are in a different league.
I was thinking the same thing, Barbara, with the Common Core aligned stickers, and then now Science of Reading aligned.
Right. And I'm sure
any
you
of the
all
buzzwords that come out. Yep,
yeah.
We see them all the time. Yep.
Yeah.
So we do want to dig into the actual tool now so people can get a better understanding of it. Like you mentioned, Barbara, there's 8 different, are they domains?
We're calling them domains.
Dimensions.
Yeah.
Dimensions. Thank you, Sue. And I wanted to really pause at number 1, because when I personally read it, the title is Laser-like Focus on What Matters Most for Literacy. And I went to Lori and I go, what matters most for literacy? Oh, what does that mean? That's a meaty statement for dimension number 1. So I really was hoping we could spend a little bit more time probably on that one and just kind of unpacking it for us. So Sue, do you want to jump in and we can follow up?
Yeah. So what this is an initial SWOT at bloated and bulky curricula that include everything in them. And we know, so in choosing curricula, we want to say to people, be careful of the bulk and the bloat. But people who also have to use a curriculum, because it's what they've purchased, it's what they have, they aren't going to get another choice. Look for these things, because we've talked to people in districts that have one of these basals, and you can find teachers that don't know what to focus on, or focus on stuff they used to focus on. And so what we did is we laid out, and you'll see here, even though we don't have the dimension of foundational skills, we say foundational skills really important. Reading complex text, and the communal reading of complex text, where students are working with one another, is there. Volume of reading to build students' knowledge and their vocabulary, because it's a great way to build vocabulary. And then making sure that students are writing and talking about what they're reading, because sometimes you can see writing siloed, or you can see students who are going to be being in collaboration, and it's all about how they're collaborating with one another, but we want it to be about what they're collaborating about. Then what this section does is it says, and I say this as an author of the Common Core, standards are not curriculum, and don't just pick one and put that for the Tuesday and Wednesday, move on, and it shouldn't be the focus of daily instruction. And you all know, Lori and Melissa, better than anybody about how important it is in literacy to have sort of a holistic view. So you're reading and writing and talking and reporting on what it is that you're reading. And so there's a sense that we want people to, yes, pay attention to standards, because they do set out the complexity, the sophistication, the challenge of what you're supposed to be learning about, but it doesn't say the how. And so, and how to use the standards. So we want to say, ooh, careful about the standards, because there's all this, oh, we're aligned to standards, or we're aligned to standards based. And then we take another look at reading strategies. Again, huge research base for reading strategies, really, really, really important. But once you teach them to kids, they should activate them when they're having trouble. You don't activate them every single day of your lives and every single time you're reading. So much time is spent on that. Now, it's important because text structure is one of those. Like, how is the information coming to me? Is it problem solution? Is it sequential? What's going on? Because then I can begin to follow where the author is taking me. But it's not the purpose of the reading. I want to be able to learn from what we're reading. And then the final criteria in that section is just all about, it's about bulk and load, and it's also about sustained attention on a topic and how important that is. So it's sort of the whole kit and caboodle. And then when you think about, Melissa, the ideas that we say are most important, that have a substantial, formidable research base to them, each one of those is taken on in one of the next 4 or 5 dimensions. Gotcha. And it deals with both what the standards say, because it's important, what is the complexity, but then it tells you how, what the research tells us, not just what Barbara and Sue and Meredith and David say, but how the research tells us to handle those. So that's why it's so important that any rubric you're looking at isn't just about standards alignment, but is also about knowledge building.
Yeah. I wanted to back up to one of those that you mentioned, Sue, which was
Yes.
the strategies, because one of the things we've heard a lot for pushback kind of against content-rich ELA is that they don't focus on these reading strategies, and there is research behind it. Do you want to just reiterate?
I will. And I'll say that once students learn them, they can use them. You don't have to keep teaching them. And I remember there was something that Tim Shanahan and I communicated about, and he was saying, it is a waste to use reading strategies on a text you're able to access and understand.
Right.
What good readers do is they access the strategies. Like if I'm reading about physics, right, I'm almost immediately lost. So what do I have to do? I have to kind of figure out where's the author taking me? How's the author offering me this information? Oh, here's a question I have. Did the author, he or she, answer that earlier or later? Or is it a question I want to ask myself? Those are things. Once you teach them, kids have got them. Now you might remind students to use them, right? And you may do some more teaching on text structure, right? With a particular text that maybe, you want students to understand how the information comes to them. All that's legitimate and important to do. But again, the reason we read is to learn stuff. And I feel like for decades, that we sort of got away from that. It was like about the reading strategies. It was about the standards. It wasn't about, well, what am I actually learning? And I think that's one reason why you sometimes hear kids say, reading, because it's not about the joy of learning stuff.
Yeah,
I think
Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
It just seems to me to be one of the really, really important statements in this review tool, that the curriculum is designed to seamlessly integrate these practices in reading, writing, speaking, listening, and facility with language. And from my experience in visiting over 40, I think it's about 45 districts across the country now over the 5-year history of the Knowledge Matters School Tour, that's what these curricula do so powerfully, is that, yes, these strategies are important, but absent guidance from either good curriculum um, or knowledge of how to do it themselves, teachers have been left to sort of largely sort of focus on the standards, and the standards are in many ways sort of statements of strategy of strategies in many cases, and to try to figure out how to do that themselves. Whereas here you've got a professional team that's labored for many years and curated elegant, rich texts with purpose, and this build over the years and so forth, and seamlessly integrated those strategies at the right place and in the right way, and not. I mean, I have just great empathy and regard for the attempt that teachers made in DY, do it themselves, sort of curriculum development over the years, and taking the standards and started working back from there. But this is done so much more subtly, but purposefully, and integrated in appropriate ways with the right sort of dosage, I guess, if you will. But with the premium, with the priority, with the purpose being the content, putting the content in the foreground, and really building that knowledge over time.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to say, Barbara, is that like what's in the foreground? It's not that we're getting rid of it. I mean, I don't even know what that would look like if we totally got rid of strategies and standards. Like they just read a text and then write what knowledge they built. I don't think that's what any of the knowledge building curricula do. I'm not familiar with all of them, but what I've seen is, like you said, Barbara, really integrated and smart, like use of, okay, we're going to summarize here because it's going to help you
That's right.
understand what's happening. Or let's talk about what the theme of this text is, because this is the time that it's going to help you make sense of this text and what you learn from it. So I think that makes total sense to me, is that they're all still there, but it's just the knowledge is in the foreground. Standards, strategies,
and the connection
are
to the writing
helping
too. And I know Sue will
Yes.
talk about this when she talks about that dimension particularly, but it never ceases to surprise me how recent in our experience has been, and probably in many cases still is, the practice of completely separating writing instruction from what students are reading and discussing. And because when I talk with folks in out on the school tour, and I think I might have shared this with you all before. Honestly, when we start to sort of interrogate and interview educators, like, what's the first thing that changed for you? What did you notice, even in those first couple months? And they talk about the writing. And then so we would tease that out a little bit and find out that, it's not so surprising, because kids are writing about things that they know and that they just learned, instead of it being later in the afternoon on some prompt that has nothing to do with what they're learning earlier in the day. I love the story of the little girl that said to me, when I asked her why she liked writing so much more now than she did the year before when they were using a different curriculum. And she said, she looked at me and said, well, because now I have something to write about. Anyway, it's this integrated, nature of the work that is so important about these curricula, and that I think you'll see sort of embedded throughout this tool.
Yeah, I see that juxtaposition in the field as well. I've been in classrooms and teachers will say the same thing. Like, I notice students are writing so much more and their writing is so much more powerful and cohesive. But then I also hear that same pushback of like, oh, the curriculum doesn't, not in the same classrooms usually, but the curriculum doesn't teach writing explicitly. And I think it's because it is, like we've talked about, in the background instead of in the foreground. And it's really difficult if all we've known or all we've seen in the past has been the traditional basal types of curriculum, that we're unfamiliar with these new structures, right? Like I've even heard, the curriculum doesn't teach reading strategies. This curriculum doesn't teach writing, all of these things. But then when you, Barbara, like you said, when you kind of nail down, teachers are like, wow, the writing is the biggest thing that I see improve. And I mean, even personally, my own daughter, when COVID hit, I was working with her at home using one of the high quality curricula, and she was in third grade. And her writing from then is eons better than it is now in sixth grade with a workshop model, because she's not writing about anything connected to reading. So it's just these like stories. And when I look at the third grade stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, your writing was so much better, because you have something to write about. You've become a vocabulary expert on the topic. You are implementing all of the cool skills that you've learned, because you don't have to think about the content as much, right? Like your brain is free to do that. So I think that's like really important, that it's different in how it's laid out. And so just really encourage anyone listening, like teachers, leaders, like really be detectives here with this tool.
Right. I love that you said that, because that's the advice that I give to folks too. I mean, when you really look at and begin to sort of study these 8 dimensions, you'll see Sue uses the metaphor of sort of how it all gets knitted together, and I really like that, because you're sort of describing the experience of, oh, it doesn't have strategies, it doesn't have writing. That's because it's not being is sort of a separate thing that's that's taught in isolation. But I remember the first this happened to actually be a Wit and Wisdom, the first visit that we made to a district using the Wit and Wisdom curriculum, and they said the folks said, we could never have put this together as elegantly as it was done here, and it's just that sort of that knitting that Sue talks about. Anyway,
Yeah.
Sue, I'm sure that we're ready for you to start to talk about some of the other ones, right?
Do you
I
want
know,
me to
that's what I was
you want me
thinking.
to do
Yeah.
like a little whirlwind? So I'll take you through it just really, really quick, because I know people
Yeah.
can look at it and study, but just so you kind of understand what's there and how it works together. So
Yep.
the first one is about the communal close reading of complex text. Now, in standards, they've got complex text, grade level complex text, very important to pay attention to. But what the tool does is talks to you about what the research says about repeated encounters. And now what we're talking about is also some sort of a culminating assignment, which there's a lot of research about. Is once I've read a lot and talked a lot, it's really good for me to pull my knowledge together and ask me to talk to you about it or write to you about it, and really important. So that's what one of the research says. So again, this is going beyond the standards into the research. Then we've talked about vocabulary and how important it is to have routines so that it's built in. We talk some, because those standards deal with vocabulary, really important. But we also know one of the most important things is that you don't just teach a word with a definition, that students have to, in context, many things in context. You can play games into out of context, but that students use the vocabulary. You mentioned it, Lori, in the writing, that when your daughter was writing, she was pulling some of the vocabulary that she had learned about. That's how it gets stuck in our brains. It doesn't get stuck in our brain by just looking at, oh, here's a word and here's a definition. So again, going beyond the standards and the connection to reading. So when you're learning vocabulary, one of the best ways and fastest way to learn vocabulary is to read a volume of reading, which is what comes next, right? So and Barbara referenced this earlier, there's one text sort of bootstraps the next text, so that I'm reading in a context. I'm sort of getting the vocabulary and getting the syntax. Vocabulary may be expanding, maybe a little bit different, but I understand more, so I can get more of the vocabulary, which becomes really, really important. And this is a place too where we actually name that you should stay with a topic for 2 to 3 weeks. We know that's what students like to do. It's how you can go deep. And then you want them talking about it. And here, what we really want to do is make sure that there are lots of the curriculum excuse me, talks a lot about um, talking together and building sort of a community of learners. So goes beyond the standards again. Here's what you want to be as a good collaborator, but here's what we want you to do when you build the knowledge. And then writing, we've just done that sort of in spades about how important it is to be able to do that, and the fundamentals of writing, which we've talked about. But again, those can be in the background, in the context of your writing about what you're reading. And so that takes us through the content pieces. And then we have two more. One of them is making sure that all students have access to grade level content. It sounds like a duh, but it still is happening in places. You can use a basal and do leveled reading, and that's all you do. And we've heard places that do that because that's what they've done before. And then this notion of, which I know there's a lot more talk about now, about what's relevant, sort of the mirrors, the windows, the sliding doors. Really important, not that students only read about themselves, but they learn about others, but they also see themselves reflected in their readings, which feels relevant and powerful to them. And then the last one is about ease of enacting curriculum. Now, if you ask us about the 8 that are there that we have on the website, they're different. And depending upon your teaching staff and the turnover and everything else, you might choose one or the other. But what's really important is that you can watch as we dig into those curricula to be able to write the little blurbs, you can see that there are routines that come in and to both, and they're helpful to teachers, right? Because you don't have to teach something new each time. Students get used to it, so they know when they're going into a group to discuss what they're going to do, and when they're going to write, how they're going to do it. Maybe they're going to talk about it first, etc. So there are these routines that are really helpful to teachers. And then there's an educative part of it. And Barbara has done interviews with folks that have taken on a new curriculum. How important it is that they understand the why of the how of what's being done. That it's not just, okay, here you do, go do a new thing. Don't worry about it. Just, we're telling you now to do it, but they actually explain the why, and that's the goal.
I think that's one of the really another really important feature of these curricula that I like to talk about, and I think is maybe undervalued, and that is the extent to which. And so we're inviting, this is an invitation to those who are reviewing curriculum to consider and give weight to, because it's important, the fact that it's not just a designed to advance student learning, but it's designed to support and advance educators' understanding of the why and how this knitting, this very sort of advanced level of knitting gets accomplished. So there's some examples of these curricula include samples of student responses, tips for effective feedback, models of exemplary practice, explanations of how program elements facilitate student learning, and so forth. So that is one of the other things that we hear so often when we're out on the school tour, that teachers will say that they, things like, I was getting ready to leave. I'd about decided I was done. And this has rejuvenated my passion for teaching. Yeah, no, I mean, me too, Lori. I mean, it's moving. And so, in fact, on the Knowledge Matters website, where we actually curate a number of the videos that we have amassed over these many different school districts that we visited, you can sort by benefit, certainly benefits for social emotional learning and academic progress and student engagement and equity and these kinds of things. But we also have some of these teacher benefits, professional satisfaction, opportunities for collaboration and that kind of thing. So I think holding a curriculum to that kind of expecting that a curriculum can support educators in being better and better at their craft is not an unreasonable thing. And in fact, we feel that these 8 curricula that we identify do that quite well, and that it is a reasonable expectation of reviewing committees, to look for that.
Yeah. And I just love the idea. The knitting idea is sticking with me. I think it's amazing because when I look at all those dimensions, I still see people who are asking for a separate writing curriculum or a vocabulary program and wanting those like separate. We did it. Lori's been there too, where we had our separate vocabulary book and we did that at a different time. We did our writing over here. Um, and so I just love hearing you all talk about the way it's all knitted together and it comes together and all for this purpose of building knowledge in the end.
I think this is a nice opportunity for me uh, to acknowledge that this tool was developed by the three individuals, Susan Pimentel, Meredith Lieben, and David Lieben, who really were the authors of the publisher's criteria and the instructional shifts that were unveiled and that so many educators studied and suffered over and really embrace, sort of increasingly made their own as this shift in practice from the in the wake of the Common Core occurred. And this and we really I as head of the organization that has is offering this to the world is thinks of this as sort of the next chapter in that work. And so it really does represent Sue and Meredith and David's evolution, and contains their best sort of thinking about how the standards really do show up and how we should be expecting publishers, in the early days of the publisher's criteria, though, well, Sue could probably speak to this. It'd be an interesting, they sort of did the best, the best that they could in sort of discerning what it was going to take for publishers to achieve these standards. But we've learned an awful lot since then, and we've seen how some publishers have been able to do it, and some of the the things that have worked and not in their next versions of those curricula, and that really is that learning, that observation, the results of those in some cases experiments, in some cases really success is sort of baked into this tool, we think.
And I want to underscore just one point, because we've done so much talking about the joy of building knowledge, the importance of building knowledge. And I know people probably know this, but there's like 50 years of research that says the more I know about the world, the better reader I become. The better reader I become, the more knowledge I can access and learn. So they're deeply, deeply intertwined. And so it isn't like, well, all of a sudden we don't care about reading comprehension anymore, because of course we do. And knowledge is a pathway towards it, a huge pathway towards that. So I just wanted to put that out there, since people have talked about sort of siloed, or do you still care about what kind of readers students are? Yeah, that's one of the whole points, besides being great thinkers and knowing a lot about the world.
So this gives me a nice opportunity to announce that Sue and Meredith and David have developed, and we will be releasing probably later this month, not this month, November, this month, December, a research compendium. So for each of the criteria that make up these 8 dimensions, we will be, sort of annotating where the research for that claim, that expectation, that demand that we should have of curricula, why that's there, what the research says about that. So
that's cool.
Yeah, we're going to eat that up.
Yeah,
we're going to dig into that and bring that to our listeners for sure.
Our guest list right there.
Good. So fun. Thank you for doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, how people ask. You know how people ask. Is this just like what y'all think?
Right.
Or is it? Can you substantiate it? So we say, yeah, we can substantiate. We want to.
Yep.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, I think we just have a couple quick questions of like sort of myths or things we've heard that we just wanted you all to, give your thoughts on.
Okay.
One of them being, you kind of brought this up with younger readers. We know foundational skills are really important for those younger readers. Where does this knowledge building and where does this tool specifically, how does it fit for students who are just learning how to read, right? If they might not be able to read those books on their own, how does this work for them?
Well, I just have to dig in here. So yes, knowledge building right from the start. I mean, yeah, they can't read the text. So they're not going to, the text they're learning to read, which is 3 or 4 words on a page and, repeats and does all of that, but read alouds.
Yeah.
Talking about things and read alouds that are obviously above grade level, what they can't do themselves. So, and Barbara will say this because on the Knowledge Matters websites, it says right from the start. And one that interests students, so there's joy of learning, but it's also that I think that, and this was partly when we were putting the tool together, we think about read alouds a lot in sort of K2, but they're still useful for several grades later. Now, that doesn't mean that's all students should be doing is listening to something, but I think our reading ability and our listening ability doesn't catch up until, I remember Edie Hirsch said this to me, then doesn't catch up until in the middle school years. And so there's lots of ways when the little youngins, they want to learn about all kinds of things. And so right from the start.
Yeah, I'm trying to flip through quickly, and I'm not going to be able to. A rubric from a state that will remain nameless that talks about students only reading text that they only reading text that they have some knowledge of or something like that. And it's kind of crazy making this idea that we learn to read and then we read to learn, because the fact is that can and should begin at the very youngest of grades. I mean, increasingly there are wonderful decodable texts that build knowledge at the same time too. But what Sue's talking about and what we're sort of most familiar with is the opportunity for kids to, at least in their first or second reading of a text, for that to be done communally and through a read aloud. So and then they, get exposed to these wonderful words and start. One of the most popular blogs that we've ever put out was one that Sue and Meredith and David wrote. That's on the Knowledge Matters website. Gosh, I don't even remember the name of it. So it's called The Dinosaurs. But
I know this one.
You know this one too, yeah.
I think it's the dinosaur effect. I'll link it.
Yes,
in the
the
show notes.
dinosaur
I'm linking everything.
Yeah.
Yes, the dinosaur.
I mean,
Fine. I'll tell you what you wrote. It's fine.
It's sort of that phenomenon, like, why, how is it that 2 and 3 year olds, 2 and 3 year olds know so much about dinosaurs?
And they can say these names that are like, 25 letters or something like that. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
When little kids like being experts as much as any of us, right? Maybe even more so. And so we need to give them the opportunity to be so.
And read alouds are under one of the dimensions. So we specifically call them out, Melissa. Really important.
That's great.
Awesome. I just linked actually an episode we did on read alouds very recently in our show notes. So if you haven't listened to it and you're looking for a direct complement to this conversation, there's a link in the show notes to that. And within those show notes, there's a resource to a book. So
there you go.
Great.
Yeah.
But I have one more question.
Okay.
And this is one we get all the time. I'm so excited for this particular question. So if ELA curriculum is content rich, can it replace social studies and science? And why not?
Go, Barbara.
Well,
I like how Lori answered it. She just said, "Why not?
Why not?" I'll just cue everybody. It's don't.
There are 2 important notes that accompany this tool on the first page of the document. The first one being the one that we've talked about, and that is that we specifically did not include criteria for evaluating a curriculum's foundational skills build, because we think that there are other tools out there that do that, and we wanted to be really clear that this wasn't trying to be an all-encompassing tool. The second one says that building knowledge through content-rich ELA curricula should never be considered a substitute for strong history, social studies, and science instruction in the elementary grades. And in the presence of high-quality curriculum and instruction in these disciplines, which will include opportunities to use and practice one's literacy skills, we can imagine that time dedicated to English language arts might be brought back in line with other disciplines. I mean, this is my dream, is that increasingly high quality social studies and science curriculum will become the norm in elementary schools, and that as a consequence, because what I consider to be high quality science and social studies curriculum teaches a lot of important content, and in doing so has students read, write, speak, and listen about those things, that they will be doing more of it, but it won't necessarily all be during the ELA block. I mean, the the uh, the reason for it is sort of obvious in the passion that students have about learning those areas, that content. I've been out on over this past year, we've probably visited more schools to learn about their implementation of high quality science instruction at the elementary grades than we have even in ELA classrooms, to districts that have adopted ELA curricula. And those visits don't feel a whole lot different in many ways in the presence that we're seeing of the literacy skills that are being practiced, that are being used. Boy, in a well-run in a classroom where they're using some of these better science curricula, these kids don't even know that they are getting the writing practice that they are, because they're just so feverishly taking their notes about their experiments and so forth. But certainly the passion that these kids have for, in this case, science. We haven't started visiting schools that are using high quality history and social studies curriculum, kind of chomping at the bit to do that. But we obviously need some improvement in that universe of HQIM social studies. A lot of progress has been made on the science front. But yeah, I mean, if to say nothing of the knowledge that we need our young people to have in these content areas, they animate the heck out of little kids to be learning about these topics. And I will, whenever, even before I went on a school tour visit that was focused on a particular content area, but more on ELA, when I ask kids what their favorite subjects are, history and science always come up as first, at the top of the list.
Absolutely. Well, to wrap things up with you all, a couple of things about the tool that we've learned. One, this is just one tool that people should use as they are reviewing curricula, not the only tool, but one, especially if they are digging into looking for a knowledge building curriculum. It can be found on the Knowledge Matters website, correct? That's where I found it.
KnowledgeMattersCampaign.org. That's right. It's right on the homepage.
Perfect. And are there any other tips that you want to give if people are interested in using the tool?
I was just going to say one thing we heard when we did a webinar on it. What people said, well, are you doing trainings on it? And we said, well, no, but people can use what's on the Knowledge Matters campaign website. So we have blurbs about each one of the 8 that we think are superb. And you can see, you can train people and say, here's the dimension, here's the criteria for this dimension. Go see if you can find it in the write-ups. Now, the write-ups are small, short and not made to be whatever, but it's a way for people to kind of get a sense of what they should be looking for. So that was one of the questions that had come up for us. Sorry, Barbara.
No, I think the only other thing that I would say, and that we didn't really have a chance to talk about, maybe we can come back and talk about it when we've got a little bit more to say and claim as success, and that is that because of so many of so much legislation that has been passed in recent years about the science of reading, a number of state departments of education are being required to develop review processes to ensure, not all of those laws, but many of those laws have a curriculum component, and say that that the state education agency needs to identify a list of curriculum that is science of reading aligned. And so we have been in conversation with a few states, I would say almost like a number of states already, that are interested in using this tool, and asking us sort of how, to your question, Melissa, given that it's not we're not trying to replace anything that's out there. We're not trying to replace Ed Reports. We're saying this is your add-on, for digging really deep on the knowledge piece, if that is of interest to you, and it should be. And actually, there's one state already, Wisconsin, that has recently issued in response to legislation, a committee was put together that was tasked with creating a rubric, and this tool is adopted almost in toto, along with other things. But there are many of these criteria that we've been talking about today that are embedded in that state's rubric already, that will be used to create a list of curriculum coming up. And as I said, there are about 5 other states that we've been some conversation with already about that. So and so that's my last way of saying, it's on the website. Poach it. Take it, use it, adapt it, make it your own.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
We're giving
it's in
it
our
away.
show notes as well. It's here. Please use it. If you're listening, reach out with questions. We always respond and answer. And we can't thank you enough, Sue and Barbara, for everything that you've done to make this come to the hands of educators who so desperately need it. So thank you so much.
Great.
Well, and
Thank you.
Can't thank you all enough for the great work that you do. We're big fans, and your work is really, really important. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ditto.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.